Good evening and welcome to Metro Focus. I'm Rafael P. Roman. Governor Andrew Cuomo and his challenger Cynthia Nixon go head-to-head tomorrow night in their first and only debate before the gubernatorial primary on September 13th. The governor's agreement to participate in the debate came after 3 months of accusations from the Nixon campaign that he was afraid to engage her. A recent poll from Siena College revealed that among likely voters, Cuomo led the actor-turned-politician by 31 points. Nixon is obviously hoping that her performance will help close that gap, but can she do it? Joining us now to help answer that and other questions are New York Assembly member Dick Gottfried, a surrogate for Governor Cuomo's campaign, and former Council Speaker Melissa Mark-Viverito, who has endorsed Cynthia Nixon. Welcome to the program, both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. Speaker Mark-Viverito, let me begin with you. As I mentioned in the introduction, the polls give Governor Cuomo a convincing lead as we approach this primary. What does Cynthia Nixon have to do in this debate to reduce that gap?
Well, first of all, I would contest that I think polls in this day and age are way off. There's a set of voters that polls are not capturing, and those are new voters, engaged voters, voters who want to see a change happen, and we saw that when it came to the election of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So there is an engaged base. I think Cynthia Nixon is doing what she needs to do. She has a vision for this state that is truly inclusive, based on unwavering progressive values, one that speaks to every corner of the state. And so I'm excited about her candidacy. I've been with her on the campaign trail. I have seen people react to what she has laid out. She has an extensive platform on her website. I agree with every single point, and it's one that really speaks to the core values of what we should be about and what we are about as a state.
Well, the debate will obviously be controlled by the moderators, but what will she be trying to focus on during the debate? In other words, what will be her line of attack?
The line of attack is about the fact that she has a vision which is unwavering in its progressive values. The challenge and the concern that many of us have had with Governor Cuomo over the years is that he only does things that are progressive when he is pushed up against the wall. I've been frustrated as a progressive over the years, having been 12 years in office, 8 of those years under the leadership of this governor, in which he bullies and he's petty and he doesn't like people to have a difference of opinion with him. That is not the leadership that we need. We need a leadership that's going to bring the city together. And it all started with pre-K, when the mayor de Blasio talked about wanting to have pre-K. That to me demonstrated, unfortunately, the lack of leadership that we needed to see in this state. So Cynthia Nixon's platform is one that brings communities together, one that lays out progressive values when it comes to education, when it comes to criminal justice reform, investing more in education to create an equal playing field and to really invest in the future of our children. That is where it all starts. It starts with education, and she has been fighting on behalf of our children in this state for decades.
Assemblymember Gottfried, if this is the line of attack,
right,
how will the governor respond?
I think what the governor ought to do is focus on the things that he's been able to accomplish in a state where there has been Republican control of the state Senate, and yet he got the marriage equality law passed in his first year. He got the SAFE Act, the strongest gun control legislation in the country, enacted through a Republican state Senate. Nobody ever thought that could happen. He got paid family leave enacted, universal pre-K statewide. I don't know if anyone would have thought that that could have been done. We have the strongest Affordable Care Act exchange of any state in the country. He's been strengthening the medical marijuana law. He banned natural gas fracking in the state. I don't think any state that has natural gas to be fracked has had a governor who has banned fracking. The Puerto Rican relief effort, the tenant protection unit set up in state government, the way he has pushed the city on reforming the city housing authority. I think all of these things are things that he has fought for. I don't think I mentioned the highest minimum wage in the country. It takes an experienced governor. It takes a governor who's willing to maybe be tough occasionally to get these things done.
Well, the speaker didn't mention this, but in the debate, the collapse of the subway system is likely to arise, and he will be, the finger will be pointed at him as the person in charge of the MTA, essentially. And also, he's relatively fresh from his statement that America was never that great. Obviously, that's going to come up. How is he going to respond to these two things?
With a couple of moments of exception, New York State has really never given the MTA the kind of support that it needs. He has put forth a $30+ billion capital plan for the MTA, which is going to take an enormous effort to get funded and get enacted. As a daily subway rider, would I like to see more done on the MTA? Absolutely. But I think
he's been the governor for 8 years, so people are going to say you're in charge of the MTA, so is he going to?
That's certainly a fair question. You know, I've been a political nerd since I was in junior high school, which was a long time ago. I've watched a lot of governors and presidents and mayors, Democrats and Republicans. There's never been one of them where I would have said everything I wanted that governor to do or that mayor to do, he was out there doing.
I want to just, again, a lot of the accomplishments that the Assemblyman has mentioned did not come willingly from the governor. It came out of a lot of pressure.
Marriage equality was pressure?
I'm thinking particularly on the Women's Equality Act, that we have not been able to codify Roe v. Wade within state law. That is something that many of us have been waiting for a long time. No leadership was demonstrated to make that a reality. Voting reform. We are one of the worst states when it comes to voting laws and when it comes to engaging our citizenry. Our transportation infrastructure, as much as the governor wants to deflect and make it seem that it is a city responsibility, it is ultimately, completely his responsibility, and he has balked from that. So Cynthia Nixon has a vision which again speaks to the true, genuine needs, and that is an inclusive vision where we all feel validated and where our voice will be respected. Driver's licenses for all is important as well, and that is definitely something she will also honor.
Does Cynthia Nixon agree with the governor that America was never that great?
People have to speak for themselves when it comes to that issue. She has made her statement on it. I support her, and so I believe that, again, at the debate, she's going to definitely present a vision. And again, I've been seeing the support on the ground. People are really very much enthusiastic about her campaign, and I believe that that is the vote that's going to come out, one that is not reflected in the polls.
Assembly Member Gottfried, in 2014, Governor Cuomo refused to debate at all his opponent, Zafir Teachout. In fact, he said that debates could be, quote, a disservice to democracy. What has made him change his mind this time around?
I don't know. I like when candidates for president and governor and mayor debate. I've occasionally had assembly re-election debates, which I've enjoyed. You know, I think candidates sometimes use a calculation as to what would be the thing to do, a level of calculation, I don't know, way above my pay grade. I think what's important is that the governor today is committed to this debate. I think getting his message out as often as possible is going to be good for him. So I'm perfectly satisfied that there will be one debate. You know, this isn't a presidential primary or a presidential race. And I think both of them will have many opportunities to get their message out, to be pressed on questions.
You know, New York State is one of the most unequal states, unfortunately, in this country. And I think it is important for those that want to represent this state to make themselves available to the population and the electorate they want to represent. This debate, the only reason the governor accepted it is because it's completely on his terms. He has rebuffed other debates that have been presented. He completely has decided what station it's going to be on, who's going to be the moderator. It has to be all on his terms. It's going to be pre-recorded. It will not be live.
The campaign did not participate in the determining the
She
format?
agreed to it, but there have been other debates that have also been presented which they have been rebuffed. And the only way that that governor would accept this is if his terms were met. So he's totally controlling the setup and the way it's done, and it's also a pre-recorded debate, which I actually have not I have not seen that happen, which is interesting. And so, again, I think the electorate merits respect in being hearing from candidates that want to represent them of what the future for this state holds. And again, we're one of the more unequal states, so there's a lot of work to do here. And I definitely am excited about the vision that Cynthia Nixon has laid out, and that we're going to get to a more equal state under her leadership.
In less than 30 seconds, I'm going to ask both of you, is this debate really going to make a difference to the overall race?
I think it will. I think it's an important opportunity for the governor to get his message out, raising the minimum wage, lowering taxes on the middle class, raising them on multimillionaires, I think is an important way to help address inequality. I think he's got a solid record to talk about.
The debate's going to make a difference?
Debates are important, and so I'm not sure will make a difference. I'm sure there are people who will watch who probably are not aware or familiar fully with the platform of either one of the candidates. But I think that debates are critically important to see the dynamic between the two, to hear what their platform is and their vision. And I'm hoping, yes, that it will make a difference in favor of Cynthia Nixon.
All right. Thank both of you for joining us today.
Thank you.